as pointed out, we're going to talk through a particular topic that's top of mind across not only the security offices of today, but the infrastructure teams, the application teams, and generally the entire business, which is all these types of cyber attacks that have been happening. So wanted to make sure that we brought a topic that's relevant for this team, and hope you enjoy the conversation. Like Ivan said, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'd love to answer them as we go on. So I'd like to start by saying these types of attacks are not decreasing in frequency. Every 11 seconds, a net new cyber attack is occurring. What this means is we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, because it's not a question of if an attack's going to happen, it's a question of when. Now, with the increasing frequency of these attacks, we're also seeing an increase associated with the cost of those attacks. So about 71% of the attacks are financially motivated. We're seeing the average cost of $13 million per cybercrime, and this was done via a process that Accenture did about 2 years ago that's documented online. So as you can imagine, the cost has almost increased, and this includes costs, not only costs associated with the disruption, paying ransom, etc., but also with the opportunity cost associated with businesses. Now, during these types of attacks, a variety of different items can happen. And the motivation of that attack can be different. You need to make sure that you're protected regardless of the type of attack. But generally, when individuals access your critical data, there's 4 areas that they're focused on. For one, trying to encrypt and then demand ransom for that particular data. I'm going to take your most pertinent data set and I'm going to hold it, and I'm not going to give it to you until you pay a particular ransom. You're having situations where users are just being malicious. They want to come in and delete it to disrupt your organization. They may not even ask for a ransom at that point in time. They may just delete your data, and they could be integrated by a particular competitor or someone like that really just wants to disrupt your operations and gain an advantage. You have situations as well where they're trying to take that data and sell it on the dark web. You see things like this wrapped around the Home Depot breach, where you see all kinds of credit card information and PII information that's being sent out on the dark web and then can be purchased by other individuals at sale. You actually go through your Google Chrome browser, they'll actually let you know certain passwords that have been identified as passwords that have been found on the dark web associated, that have been associatively saved on your system. So these types of attacks gain reputational harm to your business because the PII data that your clients have entrusted in you to keep is obviously being taken advantage of and being sold elsewhere. And then finally, some folks are doing this for trade secrets and espionage. So when you think about certain companies that have specific types of products where there's a proprietary formula or something that provides them with their golden egg as to why their business is operating and fundamentally successful, you're seeing these attacks motivated to take that information and then leverage that to gain advantage on that from a competition perspective. Now, regardless of those attacks, there's consequences wrapped in it. And this is built into that $13 million conversation that we had previously, but you're going to see disrupted operations. Attacks are occurring. You may not be able to do business critical operations. You may have all of your operations folks shift to being able to understand what the attack's going on, how to stop it, and how to recover from it. From an IT perspective, you have a significant loss of time when systems are locked up, and then obviously the recovery process. You have things like the data theft and breach that we spoke to before, which obviously is of utmost importance. You have things like ransom that needs to be paid, direct capital expenditures that are coming out of your company's pockets because of these particular situations. And in my opinion, one of the most important is the business reputation. You're only as good as your reputation today. And these types of attacks are causing clients to lose their faith within particular organizations and not necessarily entrust them with future business. So a lot of attacks of these particular events today. Now, how do you protect against that? At a high level, you need a resilience strategy. So here kind of is a high level identification of what the NIST standard framework is for cybersecurity. But you need to first identifying and assessing risk. Where are risks? What particular areas are we interested in? Endpoints. We're interested in the data areas of our system, backups, etc. You then need to figure out how to protect against it, reducing the attack surface and starting to reduce the overall vectors that you have where individuals could attack. Now, like I said, with an event happening every 11 seconds, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. You need to be able to detect these particular type of attacks. Understanding and being able to detect, then respond, then being able to protect your systems by recovering data sets or recovering operations needs to happen throughout this recovery process. Now, to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, it's not necessarily a one tool. When you look at how you can do that, it's going to be a combination of people. It's going to be a combination of process, technology, and an overall ecosystem. So while we're here today to talk to you about a small particular piece, the technology wrapped within process, you need to make sure that you're looking at this particular situation from a holistic perspective in order to make sure that your organization is going to be protected. Now, if you look at Dell Technologies and Eastern, for example, and what we can provide from a portfolio perspective, there's a wide variety of methodologies, endpoint detections, particular pieces within your infrastructure or within your data center that we can provide in order to protect, whether that's networking, storage, whether that's compute, whether that's endpoint, etc. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is specific to the storage and data protection side, so the underlying storage environments. Why I want to point this out is when you're looking holistically at how to prevent these attacks, just like you need those 4 pillars that we spoke about on the previous slide, you need to be looking at all of these items holistically. While we're focused today on the storage side, just be aware that there's other areas and avenues that Eastern and other individuals can help you with from the Dell Technologies team to push you into making sure that you're protected against these particular events. Now I'm going to pass it off real quick to Patrick, who can talk a little bit about how this whole event is changing from an attack vector perspective and where folks are focused in. Patrick, if you want to go for it, go.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ben. So I think that brings up a good point. Oftentimes when we're thinking about a broader data protection strategy, in the past, most folks didn't have to think about cyber resiliency and recover from some type of sophisticated attack as it relates to their traditional infrastructure, whether that's traditional backups of structured data or unstructured, right? But the reality of today's world is that for the longest time, backups really served as most organizations' insurance policies, right? And today's sophisticated cyber threat actors understand that they have a better chance of achieving their end goal, either causing some type of harm to your organization or receiving some type of ransom, if traditional recovery methodologies aren't available. There's a popular phrase out there, hackers used to hack in, now they log in. Pretty obvious nowadays that anyone who's responsible for the management of backups, of DR, snapshots, production storage, you're going to be a main target for compromise and that your access is trusted. Now, when we start to think about some of the additional components in a traditional, or I should say traditional components within most customers' data protection environments today, other components such as master servers, backup catalogs, often contain a lot of important information. Encrypting or deleting that data can make taking backups much longer, and oftentimes, in the case of a more sophisticated attack, may keep you from being able to recover that data. The same goes for any type of system mounted by a media server. And finally, when we start thinking about traditional repositories and places where this data lives, file systems, tape, cloud, deduplication appliances, scale out storage, NAS devices, right? They're all going to be susceptible, in particular devices that are network facing, right? If there's anything that we've learned over the past few years in this space is that any data that remains network facing is going to be susceptible to these types of attacks. regardless of the type of attack vector that Ben was mentioning earlier. You can go to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. And that really begs the question for many of our customers, really regardless of the type of data, as we'll speak more to as we go on, well, what's the real difference between some type of modern cyber resilience and cyber recovery strategy compared to what we're already doing today for backups and specifically disaster recovery, business continuity? Well, the reality is that backups serve a necessary evil for many customers, right? In a more traditional sense as that insurance policy, whereas disaster recovery has served a necessary purpose for a number of decades now in terms of recovering from more natural disasters, fires, power outages, floods, right? The idea is that you enable some type of redundancy between data centers or between the cloud. And in the case of something happening to site A, you're able to quickly enable recovery at site B based off of those redundant systems. The challenge that we're seeing here is that in the case of more sophisticated ransomware variants over the past 18 to 24 months, oftentimes customers' traditional disaster recovery infrastructure can actually propagate the infection of redundant systems among multiple sites. So in many cases, we see customers who have full-blown disaster recovery strategies, who test their DR strategies on an annual or maybe even more frequent basis. They've never thought about how that might result from some type of sophisticated attack that's able to encrypt or delete data within your traditional recovery methodologies. That's where the notion of cyber recovery comes into play. When we're thinking about cyber recovery, we're thinking about recovery from a worst case scenario where your traditional recovery methods, backups, production storage, disaster recovery, cloud, snapshots, you name it, have been compromised, right? So we'll go on, we'll explain how this works a little bit more between both unstructured and structured data as it relates to backups. But really, when I think about cyber recovery, thinking about that type of recovery from the worst case scenario where anything production facing has been compromised, what we're really typically thinking about in the case of structured backups is protecting a smaller segment of mission critical rebuild materials. More to come on that topic.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And again, we'll be talking a bit more about the differences between DR and the difference between an air gap copy to facilitate cyber recovery in a bit. But before we get there, we want to kind of make sure that we set the table. So when you're looking at the sources of data within your organization that are mission critical, basically started a few years ago, I would say 10 years ago, where all of that was structured data, right? You're looking at SQL databases, you're looking at your VMware, etc. These particular pieces were mission critical for the organization and still are widely today. What we've seen over the last couple years is that just like those SQL databases, Oracle databases, Exchange servers, etc., are mission critical, we're starting to see more emerging types of data sets that are also mission critical. You're seeing things like in the healthcare space, clinical healthcare data like PACS data or cardiology images. You're seeing within the state and local governments digital evidence and footprints that need to be there in order to incarcerate individuals. So what we've seen is that the overall landscape of mission critical data within a customer's organization has been changing. There's still that need for the structured data sets, but there's also this need for an unstructured data set. And what's interestingly enough is there's different types of requirements based on that. With the structured data sets, they're typically very compressible and deduplicatable. You can shrink them down and pack them in very tightly. You need high IOPS and low latency to get there. With your unstructured data, you typically need more bandwidth. They're not necessarily high IOPS type of activity. They don't necessarily linearly scale from a compute perspective, but there's other challenges wrapped around the quantity of data. You're seeing petabytes and zettabytes of data that's starting to come out in particular organizations. Protecting those two data sets is going to be key to making sure that you have a resilient setup in the future. Just like from an infrastructure perspective, where you're hosting that data, you have block-based arrays and hyper-converged arrays for your structured data sets. And then you have typically unstructured data arrays that are specific to your unstructured data sets. You need to keep that same methodology in mind with how you are looking at your overall recovery process. So when we're talking about how these particular processes occur, be aware that there is a fit based on the type of data set and the recovery mechanism that you should look at in order to make sure that you're cost optimized and you're optimized from a time perspective to catch these attacks, to make sure that you are stopping these attacks and then recovering from them. So like I said, a lot of companies are going to talk about, hey, we're one particular tool that can solve this entire problem. But Dell recognizes, again, the type of data is going to be different. You're going to store it on different platforms. You may need to protect that a bit differently, and you need the right tool for the right job. So what we're going to talk to you about is two different paradigms for how you can protect data. When you have dedicated unstructured data arrays and you have dedicated structured data arrays, we're recommending these particular options to make sure that they're cost effective, like I said before, and that you have the ability to map what you need, whether that be large quantities of data and massive throughput, or smaller quantities of data that are vastly compressible and deduplicatable and high IOPS. You want to separate those out and address those independently. There may be situations where you have a single converged appliance. In those scenarios, the data protection side and others may be able to do everything within one tool. But what we'll talk to you about is how to cost effectively address the solution from the unstructured and structured data perspective. So, Patrick, can you talk a little bit about some of the critical capabilities of what we've seen for cyber recovery solutions that are successful? And let's talk a little bit about where those particular capabilities fit within both of these solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we take this first from the lens of more traditional backups, going back to your point a moment ago, Ben, around traditional workloads, whether that's your databases in your environments today, things like Active Directory credentials, DNS, things that would be mission critical for some type of recovery. First off, you think about more commonplace capabilities that are available really among every vendor on the market today in terms of immutability. That's something where, from a Dell EMC perspective, with our data protection solutions, we've been doing immutability for close to a decade now. Dell EMC was really the first to pioneer things like retention locking among any vendor in the industry, something that we continue to provide today to really make it more difficult to be able to manipulate the retention of things like backups on our protection storage.
So much, Patrick. I know another one of those critical capabilities, typically being able to leverage a learning algorithm to be able to detect abnormal activity. With the vastly different types of attacks there are out there today, there's not necessarily going to be a single library that you can use to try and figure out, hey, like an antivirus software, is this particular executable somewhere within my platform? At this point in time, what we're finding is that the best way to really start to detect these particular events are being able to leverage a machine learning algorithm. It's able to take the information wrapped around user activity and then let you know when something abnormal is happening, and then be able to proactively help protect the system in those particular places and then alert users that what's going on. We're going to talk a little bit about the air gap piece as well, Patrick.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I'll echo what you just mentioned, because I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback we receive from customers, regardless of the type of data that we're talking about, is even if that data is available following some type of successful cyber attack, are you confident that that data is clean and can be recovered? It get often overlooked by a lot of folks, but that's typically one of the things that can really elongate a recovery process, regardless of the type of data. One thing that can help is having that data isolated off network. A lot of the times in recent years, I think among the industry, we've heard a lot about air gapping. We'll both spend some time in terms of how we define that process from a Dell Technologies perspective, but very basic premise, really regardless of the type of data or solution that we're talking about, is that by creating some type of isolated copy offline that's off the network and visible to cyber bad actors, you're going to have a better chance of being able to recover that data than if that data is remaining in a production network facing state.
Patrick. So the next conversation that you're going to have as soon as you get hit with these particular types of events are what data is impacted, and to Patrick's point, how do you know that the other files are not infected, that we're going to get this attack hit again? I remember I was at a well-known, and this is a public attack when I was at JP Morgan. I was managing their data infrastructure within their massive parallel processing environment. And we had an individual that sat in there for years. Basically, created a user ID, was in our environment, didn't do anything. Then all of a sudden turned on one day, deleted encryption keys, and started to encrypt everything. In that particular situation, the first thing that the CISO came to me and asked is, Ben, what is impacted and how do we know that everything else isn't, so we're not going to come up with this particular attack again? Regardless of the particular solution on the Dell data protection side or the unstructured data side with Dell, you're going to be able to have that particular set of data, and then you're going to be ready when that particular attack happens.
Spot on. And I think the main focus for a lot of our customers really comes down to, can you successfully recover, and how long is that process going to take, right? And I think one thing that we've seen more and more over the past 6 months is, following some type of successful attack, what's the impact and what's going to be the time delay as far as analyzing what would be that data for restoration, for cleansing, when the FBI is knocking on your door to do that type of analysis, right? How can we really accelerate that type of process from a recovery perspective to really get your business back up and running, reduce things like recovery time objective? And of course, cost is always going to be a consideration, right, Ben? And it really doesn't matter what type of data that we're talking about here. I think the good news from a Dell Technologies perspective, if not familiar, between our PowerProtect solutions for data protection of more the structured data or unstructured data, as you'll be talking a little bit more about, you don't have to eat the elephant in many cases, right? We'll probably spend some time talking a little bit more shortly in terms of what makes the most sense for some type of cyber recovery architecture, whether that be the applications that are mission critical to you or the lifeline of your business. We'll spend some more time there, right?
Exactly. And both of our solutions are able to cost optimize on that side. And everybody on this particular webinar right now is lucky. You have folks like Eastern who have the capabilities to go out there to help you discover your environments, to be able to map your environments to criticality, and then be able to let you know what you should protect in what particular areas based on business criticality. And it's of utmost importance. Don't let any vendor come in and say, oh, you need an air gap for everything. While yes, that could be utopia, there's always a cost benefit analysis associated with it. In the unstructured data side, do you really need within a hospital system to have your videos protected in an air gap when it's a premium cost to be able to do so? Or should you just look at your x-rays and your cardiology images where patients' lives are in danger if those particular items aren't available? Conversation is leveraging the team at Dell Technologies and Eastern. You need to be able to do that mapping. And again, everybody on this call is primed for that just based on the capabilities of the Eastern team and what they can provide. Finally, we need to talk about how we can audit the end-to-end attack, right? We talked a bit about understanding what was impacted. We also talk a bit about understanding what was not impacted. Both are important because they'll facilitate how you can move forward from the attack and go forward. And both of our solutions on the Dell data protection side and the unstructured data side can do so. All right, now that we talked a little bit about the backgrounds of what or why you need to be aware of these particular cyber events, what these particular software packages and systems need to be able to do to protect your environments, let's talk a little bit about the actual solutions that Dell can provide. So Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about the good, better, best wrapped around the Dell data protection side and what we can do to help safeguard environments?
Hey, Pat, just before you do that, just want to take a check. Does anybody have any question? Because I know we've been going through a lot of data being pushed to you guys. I just want to make sure that if anybody has any question, we can stick a break right now and kind of go through it and see where things are. And just to let you know, I'm going to put a plug in. One of the areas that Eastern can help out in this is we can actually come in and do a much deeper dive into what's going on in your environment and help you to assess what's your next move should be and how you should go ahead to do or decide what it should be in terms of whether you want to go down this route of cyber solution, how much data you want to put into it, what area do you want to focus on. Those are things that we can help you with from the Eastern perspective. And we work hand in hand with Dell to do this so that they understand where we're coming from. And, we also provide the best advice for what needs to happen going forward. So I just want to kind of check if anybody has any question. If you don't, I'll give it back to Patrick and Ben.
Remember, folks, don't be shy. Throw something in the chat. I know we've all probably been affected by these particular attacks, maybe directly, maybe we knew somebody indirectly. I know for a fact in my particular scenario, right, locality, it will affect you. For example, I know my nieces go to Baltimore County Public Schools, right? Recently, Baltimore County Public Schools was hit with ransomware. They were out of school for a week. Again, everybody is susceptible. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So if you have questions, if you're interested in sharing a story of something that may have happened to you, right? Or if you want to dive into deeper into anything we just talked about, feel free to add it in the chat. That's why we're here.
Definitely. If you're being shy right now and want to soak it over a little bit more, we will of course be leaving some time for Q&A at the end.
All right, guys, go ahead.
Fantastic. Great. So from a Dell Technologies, PowerProtect data protection, backup and recovery perspective, right? When we're thinking about more traditional structured data and backups, right? On the left-hand side here, from a cyber resiliency perspective, really for any customer, right? When we're thinking about backups, there's general best practices that we would recommend as a baseline. Of course, backing up your entire environment, making sure that you have some type of secondary copy of all your data is going to be a general best practice, right? When we think about applying from a security perspective, additional hardening, of course, we do have things like immutability and retention locking, which is available to all of our customers, something that you can easily turn on your existing PowerProtect appliances. And one thing that we really differentiate, even from a baseline security hardening perspective compared to other vendors on the market, is when we're thinking about things like immutability and retention locking, we're able to guard against more common threat vectors such as NTP clock manipulation, which we'll talk about more shortly. But in general, good best practices, retention lock backups, back up everything that you have in your environments. For our customers who are looking to be able to take this a step further, of course, there's a number of federal regulatory guidelines coming out of Washington, D.C. over the past 12, 18 months, all really in agreement for some type of offline air-gapped backup architecture, whether that's CISA, whether it's Gartner, whether it's the White House. A number of bodies have come out in agreement calling for this type of offline air-gapped vault architecture. For us, that's a better capability and really falls under what we were talking about earlier, having some type of air-gapped offline copy of your backups. Now, when we think about the best of breed capabilities and really what would encompass a true cyber recovery solution for immutability, isolation, and of course, intelligence into your backups, that's where our PowerProtect CyberSense comes into play. And that CyberSense I like to think of as our secret sauce. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but that really builds upon that air-gapped PowerProtect appliance vaults for typically a smaller portion of your environment, critical rebuild materials, and that full content analytics is able to help you answer the question, can this data be used for recovery? And we'll talk about why that's so important as we go on.
Thanks, Patrick. And just like the data protection side is a good, better, best approach for how you need to address this particular solution, we also have the same on the unstructured data side. And you'll see that the conversations wrapped around good, better, and best are very complementary. A simple approach to be able to tackle these particular items from both particular types of data's perspective. So unstructured data is a bit different. Right? There's way more when it comes to physical quantity of data. So you need to be able to capture that as fast as possible to reduce the RTO associated with being able to recover back. So when we're looking at our solutions, good is simple. Good is OneFS, which is our Isilon or PowerScale product. It's our flagship product in the unstructured data world that has read-only snapshots and replication. As Patrick pointed out before, the more copies of data you have, the better you will be in your environment of being able to survive one of these attacks. So having independent snapshots in production and DR, which is what OneFS and PowerScale provides, is important for you to increase your overall ability to recover from these particular events. Now, that's the good. And a lot of folks today have replication with snapshots on each side, but there's also a better. When you're looking at a better, similar to what's provided within CyberSense, we have something called Superna Ransomware Defender. You've heard Superna before. Superna is an integrated product with Isilon that facilitates DR failure. So up to this particular point, Superna has been the premier product. It is sold with 95% of our particular clusters that need replication, that aren't application aware, that will basically move over things like share information, export information, quota information, on top of what SyncIQ moves, which is the data structure, the data permissions, and the physical data itself. Now that Superna Ransomware Defender has been tightly integrated within the Isilon environment. Versus previous conversations, what we're looking at is we are facing a restart a bit. So Patrick, you may want to bring up a deck on your side. My getting a mandatory reboot for my organization. I can't push.
It happens.
But regardless of that, the Superna Ransomware Defender is tightly integrated in. So while other solutions typically revolve around learning algorithms that are based off of audit processes that involve syslog forwarding out to a secondary array and then processing it there, Superna takes it a bit further. It's basically running a tail of the audit log on the Isilon system. So when you're talking about moving things through syslog and out, you're talking about a large process. It's very memory constructive associated with how much memory it's consuming, and it's going to take a lot of time. While you're tailing an NFS export, you can do that very quickly to reduce the overall time that it's going to take to detect these particular events. When a user is detected of doing something that it shouldn't be doing, there's two different modes that Superna can sit in. It can sit in the mode that says, I automatically am going to flag this, create an alert, take an automatic snapshot, and then immediately suspend that user session to stop any activity that they're doing before. Or it can alert, it can take a snapshot immediately of the system that protects any other data that's going to be encrypted from that point forward, and then wait for an administrator to take a look and understand what's going on and validate, nope, this is a normal activity, or this is something that is malicious and we want to stop it. There's obviously a learning curve associated with that learning algorithm that the system will learn your normal user behavior. So it's not like you're getting a ton of alerts, but this particular system is able to understand what users are doing compared to what they've done in the past, and then make sure that they're alerting on it, that they're taking a snapshot of the system to protect your data from that point forward, and then they're obviously being able to take action. Because they're running a tail of that audit log, they know exactly what files have been impacted by this particular user that could be infected. So that list will be spit out. And then it also provides you with a process where you can feed that list into a recovery mechanism to recover all of those independent files from a snapshot with one simple click. That means that you're not recovering an entire snapshot of data. You're not recovering multiple terabytes. You're just recovering a small amount of files that was known to be impacted and then snapped. And then you're basically going to just recover that small subset. That's going to reduce the overall time that it's going to take you to recover. Finally, just like the data protection side, we have a better approach, which is the good with the OneFS read-only snapshots and DR, the better with Saperna Ransomware Defender, and then we add in an air gap. That air gap understands what's going on within your production environment because Saperna is the system that's running that machine learning algorithm. It's aware that an attack's happening, so it will stop SyncIQ replication to that air gap in the event that you have an active sync going on to your air gap. It can also facilitate an agent within the air gap itself to let data in from a zero trust perspective. So again, very complementary when you look at these two processes, good, better, best on the unstructured data side and the data protection side. Patrick, I know you're going to talk a little bit about the data protection solutions. You want to go for that now?
Yep. I was going to say, unless Ben, do you want to jump to your piece on the UDS if you're getting the warning sign of doom?
Yeah, I'll get that real quick, and then we'll allow you to jump on. Then I'll come back for the end. So give me one moment, folks. And again, apologies on this. All right. So when we're talking about the Isilon data protection side, again, you need to understand what are the right sources of data to protect. Unstructured contents like videos, images, file shares, logs, etc. The ransomware defender is going to be able to actively monitor your production array and let you know when something's not happening that doesn't typically happen from a user perspective. It can automatically take action. It can snapshot. It then can help you recover. And the air gap system is a tightly orchestrated entity where we're basically leveraging a third copy of data that is sitting on a third Isilon instance, where you then can have replication to that site, being aware of what's going on in your production array, and then in the event that there is a catastrophic type of event, being enabled to fail over to that third site because of the fact that it's tightly integrated in to your failover mechanism. So when we're taking a look at this, again, there's a 3-site entity when you're looking at the best solution with the air gap. Typically with prod and GR, you want that replication to occur as fast as possible. Within a cyber recovery perspective, you may not necessarily want your cyber recovery entity or your air gap environment to have replication over to it as fast as possible. Why? If you're hit with an attack, you're going to replicate corrupted data over to that air gap event. So there's typically a delay in between the air gap system that's associated with that third Isilon entity at the bottom versus having that air gap system on the same system as your DR environment. Again, they're both leveraging the same type of replication software, but there's different uses associated with DR and with the air gap environment that will facilitate this. Again, through the Saperna software and an agent that's within the air gap environment itself, the Saperna agent will say, SyncIQ, you're allowed to replicate at this point in time. It'll open up the interfaces on the array, let data come in. As soon as that process stops, that agent closes those interfaces down and completely blocks anything from the outside network that's not going from that agent, or that agent says you're good to go. So again, when you're looking at your overall protection entity on the Dell data protection side for unstructured data, you're looking at the machine learning algorithm that's running on your production array. You're looking at DR, which is leveraging SyncIQ and read-only snapshots on both sides. And then that bottom piece, an air gap cluster, to make sure that the mission critical data, the data where if your business loses, you're going to have financial impact, reputational impact, etc., is sitting. And then you have something that's monitoring and ensuring that you're not having users being able to access that particular system. So Patrick, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more on the data protection side. I'm going to stop sharing, allow you to share, and then I'll hop back on as soon as my reboot happens.
Sounds good. buy some Dell laptops, right? No, I'm going to get some heat for that later. Excellent. No, so I think what transitioning here now to what would be more the traditional backup and recovery of, call it structured data, right? From a Dell Technologies perspective and Dell EMC, this is an area that we've been laser focused on for really the better part of 6 years now. And I know spent some time talking about this earlier, but back in 2015, this particular platform, what we call PowerProtect Cyber Recovery, today was really born from a specific use case and customer. At the time, Sony Pictures attack, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, was really a watershed moment in terms of the IT world and security world. And at the time, Sony Pictures approached EMC Corporation with this challenge, and that a nation state, presumably North Korea, had sought to not only encrypt, but to delete all backup infrastructure, all data from Sony Pictures, in a sense, eliminate Sony Pictures from the face of the earth. At that time, we began development of an isolated recovery vault, really a way to be able to maintain customers' mission critical backups offline, to be able to restore from some type of worst case ransomware cyber attack, where production storage and your traditional recovery methods were compromised, right? Since that time, the product has really come a long way and matured. It was productized. It has dedicated support, engineering, R&D resources internally. Back in 2019, we released retention locking enhancements specific to NTP clock manipulation, as more and more customers, as we've seen in the past couple of years, have basic commoditized immutability standards put in place today. Unfortunately, that does not guard you against more sophisticated attacks, targeting things like clock manipulation to make the system think that 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years of backups has gone by like that. Fast forward to 2020, probably one of the achievements we're most proud of here at Dell Technologies, and remain today the only solution in the world sponsored and fully endorsed by the Sheltered Harbor Initiative. If you're not familiar with Sheltered Harbor was formed back around 2015, similar time frame, really with the goal of ensuring consumer confidence in the US financial system. So at the time, over 30 of the US's largest strategic banking and investment firms came together with the goal of ensuring consumer confidence. Things like, can you access critical banking information from something like an ATM following a worst case cyber attack on the financial system? The reason that that is relevant to our architecture today is that Dell Technologies PowerProtect Cyber Recovery solution is the only architecture that is supported for financial institutions looking to comply with the Sheltered Harbor standards for the financial industry. This has really been the most stringent security and data vaulting standards to date of any solution in the world, and really a number of other regions globally have looked to Sheltered Harbor for very specific, mature, next-gen cyber recovery standards. Now, as we think about what makes up the Cyber Recovery Vault today, keep in mind that this comes in a few different consumption models. Our most popular model today is deploying within customers' data centers or within some type of managed environments. We also offer a software-defined version within AWS, as well as a multi-cloud offering that really takes advantage of a cloud-adjacent architecture via Faction that has some unique advantages. But when we're thinking about under the hood, what makes up the capabilities here, as I mentioned earlier, it really comes down to isolation, both physical and logical, immutability, applying things like retention locking to make it not impossible, but more difficult to manipulate the retention of backups. And finally, intelligence, to be able to take advantage of things like machine learning, full content analytics, to be able to understand, can data be used for recovery? Now, I know I've been hating on immutability a bit earlier, and just want to be clear. Immutability is a great baseline best practice for any organization to be able to adopt. But the reality is, immutability on its own isn't enough. If that immutability isn't applied within a physically isolated, vaulted environment, then there's always going to be ways for cyber bad actors to be able to bypass traditional immutability standards for any data that's network facing. As is very commonly understood at this point, any data that remains network facing, whether that's in your data center or the cloud, remains subject to encryption or deletion. So the 10,000 foot view for us in terms of this traditional architecture, picture within a data center for the case of this example, involves what would be your traditional production storage and backup storage. In this case, our architecture really builds off of our latest generation of PowerProtect DD or data domain appliances. And the way that this works is we integrate with a number of different backup softwares out in the market, including our own. But the basic premise here is first, that data representing your mission critical applications is synced through an operational air gap. And very mature and unique to our architecture is that that data is actually pulled from the vaulted side. Unlike other solutions on the market that leverage more of a traditional push replication process where production facing data can be aware to cyber bad actors, this process is initiated from the secure offline vault side. Once that data is pulled into the isolated air gap, we're obviously not controlling or operating the network connection. As soon as that transfer takes place, the vault connection is closed, interface disabled, thus reestablishing that vault isolation. From there, we have the ability to be able to apply things like retention locking, immutability. Most of our customers will typically retain between 2 and 4 weeks of backups here, but that's completely customizable and configurable. So we apply those retention locking capabilities to ensure that even if some type of malicious code or bad data enters within the vault, it can't execute and manipulate any of the vaulted copies within that isolated system. Finally, secret sauce here in terms of the analytics would be our CyberSense software, really that best of breed capabilities that we were talking about earlier. So when we're thinking about CyberSense, I do want to be very clear on this. Contrary to many initial impressions from our customers, CyberSense is not looking for malware, right? This is not a replacement for your existing SIM tools, antivirus, log packet collection, right? The purpose of this full content analytics is to interrogate the contents of your vaulted mission critical backups to answer the question, can this data be used for recovery, right? So first, what we do is that we scan through the backup format to the file level. Amazing part of our technology, unique to any capability on the market, we read through the backups. We support a number of third-party backup softwares, including Commvault, Veritas Net Backup, beyond Dell EMC's protection software. And the really cool thing here is that you don't have to rehydrate the backups. Next, we look at over now 200 different statistics or observations for every file, things like file name, file size, type, extension. We calculate things like entropy, chunking, and other similarity measurements. And what we're actually doing is comparing those analytics to the last scan that ran. Unlike other solutions on the market that look at things like metadata, we're able to get much more granular into the full content of each file. We'll know things like database type, whether it's an Oracle or Microsoft SQL database. We're going to validate that the structure of the actual file is intact. It can actually go in and even validate checksums within the page header. No one else comes close to looking at such a wide variety of information. All of that then fed into what would be a machine learning algorithm that's able to determine, is that data risky or can that be used for recovery? And the really cool thing about this particular architecture being based on full content analytics, you don't have to update this as frequently, right? Remember that we're not looking for malware signatures which change on an hourly, minute-to-minute basis. We're really taking advantage of looking at that full content of the data, looking into the actual files themselves to be able to validate their integrity. So lastly, as it relates to CyberSense, a quick example. I'm sure many of you over the past couple months may have heard about a new family of malware called LockFile. And what's unique about LockFile is that it actually evades detection by more traditional methodologies by using a intermittent encryption, right? So LockFile actually goes in and encrypts every other 16-byte chunk in a file, which avoids detectors that look at some type of certain level of encryption or metadata analysis, right? Usually measured by things like entropy. Cool thing is we tested this out in our lab in New Jersey a little over a month ago, and this being one of the most sophisticated variants of ransomware that we've seen thus far, CyberSense, Dell's PowerProtect cyber recovery platform, was able to successfully recover and identify LockFile, enabling the customers at this point, and obviously within this lab environment, to be able to recover from this type of sophisticated attack. For timing's sake, something that we can spend more time on, and of course, a lot to take in here, but from a Dell Technologies perspective, you have a lot to choose from in terms of other vendors on the market. A lot of buzz naturally right now around ransomware data recovery. For us, it really boils down to those 3 I's that I talked about earlier: isolation, immutability, and intelligence. From Dell's perspective, unlike other vendors, when we're talking about isolation, that's going to be separate from production. We're taking advantage of both logical isolation and physical isolation. Some type of replica DR copy is not an isolated copy, right? And obviously that vaulting process, as I mentioned, very unique in that it's initiated from the secure air-gapped vault side, unlike other vendors that would be pushing from the unsecure production-facing side. When it comes to immutability, great best practice, something that we've been doing for close to a decade. Keep in mind when you hear from other vendors that immutability is the end-all be-all answer to all things. Unfortunately, at this point, there's no real industry standard when it comes to immutability beyond SEC worm compliance. That's something that we've been compliant with for a number of years now, but unlike other backup solutions on the market, we're not susceptible to more sophisticated attacks targeting things like NTP clock servers. And finally, from an intelligence and analytics perspective, we're taking advantage of full content indexing, not just metadata analysis that's commoditized item found in any backup software nowadays. That machine learning and analytics resides within the vaulted environment, right? Within that secure, clean room for the utmost security. We don't have to send that data to the cloud across a risky compromised network for analysis. In the case of what I mentioned earlier, when the FBI comes knocking on your door to do their analysis, you already have a lot of the answers in place. Having that cyber sense and being able to answer the question, can the data that you have available be used for recovery? Is that data clean? So finally, as we wrap things up, I know we're running a little bit over on time. In terms of what would be critical rebuild materials and what we recommend from a backup and recovery perspective to be able to have within this type of air-gapped vault architecture, these are some of the things that come top of mind. We see with Dell deploying hundreds, thousands of these vaults globally. Typically, this list that you see on the screen represents a great starting point, somewhere between 10 to 20% of most customers' environments, what would be most critical to have in terms of a recovery from a sophisticated ransomware attack. With that, I think we can go right on ahead, jump over Ben's slides, and But I think you're going to take us home in terms of a recipe for success and takeaways.
Yes, thanks for the time, and thanks, Pat and Ben. I just want to use this time to let everybody on the call understand how and what Eastern can help and bring to the table here. We've been working with Dell. I came from Dell after working there for over 10 years. I understand the solution and what we can bring to the table here. We can definitely come in, help you understand your data. And we simply do that by doing assessment. We can run the assessment. And in some cases, those assessments actually becomes something that you use to forecast, make better decision in your environment, because we go into details about what's going on in your environment. And sometimes customers don't know and they enjoy it. They like it because we give you more data than what you actually expected. And with that data, we can actually help you do application mapping and tell you, hey, these are your business critical data that you need to actually protect when it comes to cyber. And with that information, you can determine how much you need to move into the different vaulted location that you want. Not every data hack is going to fall into that, but we can help you to decide and define that piece. In addition, like it was mentioned earlier, we work with any backup software, right? So there's some pieces that you might already have the backup software that you're already familiar with and you want to continue to use. Okay, fine. Let's just modify what else is needed to make that next step so that you can have a plan to create a vaulted solution. And that's something that we can help you guys to define as well. And overall, if you require that you need to make a little change in what you already have to get to the next stage of the, implementing a vaulted air gap solution, we can also help you define that. So this can be a phased approach where, hey, this is where you are. This is where you need to get to. And this is what you need to get to it. Now, we can build it on a small scale first and then go to the next level. Sometimes our customer will say, hey, I just want to protect just these 4 main servers for now. I do have my intention to do these other areas, but these are the critical business ones that I need. We can build that for you and help you understand what's needed, and then do the whole, from there, you can now say, okay, I have the framework again. I can build bigger. I can build larger as I add more data and I add more workload or add more business units to that is defined data platform. And I just want to let you guys know that's something that we can do, and we do this day in and day out. And we have the right tools, we have the right resources, and we have the people that can help you to define those things.